Dear students, welcome to Java Programming Lab, exercise 9. And this exercise 9 based on user-defined exceptions, but it contains the list of programs based on user-defined exceptions and exception. And the objective of this exercise 9 of exception, and you know that user-defined exceptions are also known as custom exceptions. And these are creating your own exception class and throws that exception using throw keyword. And this can be done by extending the class exception. So generally we have class exception, that is parent class to all the exceptions generated in our program. And whatever we create our custom exceptions or user defined exceptions classes that represents our exceptions, our own exceptions. And we can throw those exceptions using throw keyword. And we know exceptions are of two types: built-in exceptions, user-defined exceptions. And these are the list of programs given in this exercise 9. Write a Java program for illustrating throw keyword, and write a Java program for creation of illustrating finally keyword. And next program, write a Java program for creation of Java built-in exception. So Java built-in exception also there, and how to handle these exceptions in our program. And next one, in a program, Java program for creation of user-defined exception. See one by one. And this is first program, illustrating through keyword. So in class exercise 9a, class name, in main method, try block, which contains the statement illustrating that the control enters the try block, the statement for display. And inside of this try block, this is important step. Here we thrown one exception called illegal access exception. Illegal access exception, and this is not a runtime error, and this is the exception, generally checked exception. And after throwing this exception, we need a catch block to handle this exception at runtime. So here illegal access exception, and we catch that exception based on this object of this exception type, and this statement for we entered catch block control and displaying what exception caught in this by this catch handler. And one method or one display statement for indicating that the main is going to end after this try and catch blocks. Okay. Coming to the command prompt, and execute, compile that one, Java C exercise 9a dot Java. So that exception generated, and Java exercise 9a. So we enter try block, one exception is thrown, and that exception was catched by this catch block. We entered catch block, and exception of that type is illegal access exception. And after this try and catch block, the main block is going to end by displaying this statement. Understood? This is the uses of throw keyword. Here it is, this one important. We are using this throw keyword to throw an exception from try block. That has to be handled by catch block. And second program, Java program for creation of illuminating this finally keyword. So inside this class exercise 9b, inside main method, we have a try block that after by with these two statements, here we are not throwing any exception, but this code generates an exception. This array with size 3 elements 1 to 3, but we are displaying or trying to access the index 10. It is array index out of bound exception. Okay, so here how this can be handled by this catch block, but we don't know what type of exception may this try block generate. That's why I have mentioned that exception as this exception. Why? Because exception is a super class to all the exceptions generated in our program. So based on that object, we are going to catch that exception generated by try block. And here it is exception caught, and we display that object to indicate that the exception caught. And here the concept is this finally keyword. So our program is meant for this one. There is a finally block. So the point of this finally block usage in program is doesn't depend on any exception generated or whether it generated or not, whether that exception handled or not. It doesn't matter that the finally block, once we define after this try or maybe after try catch, it guaranteed to execute that block of code. So it indicating that finally block entered and this is the try and catch is finished. So indicating this type of representation. We use this finally block here as this way. Okay, then go to command prompt. This one exercise 3. Compile and executed. Thus exception is generated, array index out of bounds exception at line 10, and finally block entered and executed the statement also. Okay. Next one, third program. Let a Java program for creation of Java built-in exception. There are many built-in exceptions there in our Java library, java.lang, and here it is one exception we are going to generate is null pointer exception. So in class exercise 9c inside main method try block, the code which generates the exception, and here the statement is to indicate that try block entered, control try block entered. I have an empty string object as that is initialized with null, and I'm trying to find the length of that string s dot length. So it simply gives you one exception. So here this statement generates an exception. Okay, this statement generates one exception, that is null pointer exception. Once the exception generated, this statement will not be executed here, this one, and the control comes out of the try block, and that exception thrown by this try block caught by this catch block with this type of exception, null pointer exception, as it is type of exception generated. So the catch block entered and exception is displayed on the screen. Okay, this is the statement in main method after this try and catch block. Okay, this is the usage of generating this built-in exceptions inside try block caught by catch block. Coming to exercise here. Control command prompt is compiled, execution, as try block Catch block, null pointer exception caught, and main statement executed. Okay. Next one, user defined exception. This is important. User defined exception. So I'm going to define one class with name invalid age exception that extends exception class. This is the parent class to all the exceptions. That's why I have mentioned my exception class should extend this exception class. Inside of this one, I have a constructor that with same class name and with string object. And I'm calling constructor of the superclass exception by using super keyword. This statement is optional. Whether you mention this one or not, it doesn't matter. Just define the constructor like this. Okay, this is your user defined exception. Invalid is exception. It's my own exception, not a built-in, not a error type, or not a checked or unchecked. It is my own user defined exception. In the class, right, it is exercise 9C, 9B. Okay, so I have a method called validate, verifying this age, and this method throws an invalid age exception. Why? Because this is user defined exception, must use keyword called throws, and this throws method, this throws keyword mentioned into the method declaration and indicating that this method generates an illegal invalid age exception. So here inside of this method, I'm going to check this age value as we pass the parameter age to this method when it is invoked, comparing with 18 age. So it simply throw invalid exception, invalid age exception with using new keyword and indicating one string value that not valid. Otherwise, this condition fails. It simply accept to give vote, to opt your vote. This is static method. And coming to the main method, I'm trying to invoke that method by method name without object, through an object. Why? Because this is static method. Directly we can invoke by name. And I'm giving age value as 13. Okay. When it is less than 13, 100% it generates an exception. So that's why I invoked this method inside of this try block. Right? And after this, I have a catch handler for exception generated by try block. And I'm displaying that exception occurred and remaining. Okay, go and execute this one. I'm taking 9D. So this is your code copy same here. Invalid exception class extends exception. Yes, class invalid is exception class extends class superclass exception and one constructor, and this is the class behavior of my user defined exception. And exercise 9D, here it is. Inside of this state void valid method of static type age, this method throws an illegal age exception. This is the behavior of this method. And inside of main method try block, we invoking this method by method name and one catch handler method. Here it is. Okay. Exercise 9D. Exception occurred, invalid age exception not valid, and executed. Okay, that user defined exception is created and generated Using the method invoking method giving information to the invoker or caller of that method, that the method generated one invalid is exception and that was caught by catch handler. Okay, understood? Thank you.